All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am the moderator for today's session. Today's session is a conversation about DOE's world-leading computing and computers supporting the path to improved cancer diagnosis and treatment. We look forward to this conversation, and I'll go through a few logistics before we start. I'm Allison Eckhart. I am the Acting Director of Communications for the Office of Science. And we are hosting this session today as part of the Biden administration's Cancer Moonshot. So we're really excited to hear from our two speakers today. We are recording this session, and we will be taking questions throughout the session. You can drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and those will appear. We also have captions available, so you can hit the CC button at the bottom and captions should come up. This will be a conversation today between Rick and Gina, and we'll be taking your questions, and I'll be popping in to kind of ask those questions when they apply. Otherwise, we'll save them to the end to answer if they're not part of the conversation flow. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gina to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Alison. My name is Gina Tourassi. I am Associate Lab Director for Computing and Computational Sciences at the Argonne National Lab. And I was one of the original co-leads for the DOE NCI partnership. I'm a biomedical engineer by training, and always my research work had been at the intersection of artificial intelligence, high-performance computing, and clinical research.
Oh, hi. I'll introduce myself, then we're going to go back and forth. So I'm Rick Stevens. I'm the Associate Lab Director for Computing, Environment, and Life Sciences at Argonne. I'm also a professor of computer science at the University of Chicago. And my background, I'm primarily a mathematician and computer scientist, although for the last 25 years or so, I've worked in the intersection between AI and high-performance computing and biology research, more on the basic side of biology research. Gina and I have worked together for almost 10 years on this stuff, so I'm looking forward to the back and forth today.
So Rick, based on the introduction, this partnership was born because of supercomputing and the vision we set, as you said, almost 10 years ago, in terms of what supercomputing can do for cancer research. So maybe we can give a short primer of what is supercomputing and how it differs from, general computing.
Sure. So supercomputing is the term that's used by the community that works on scientific computing to refer to the biggest, most powerful computers that exist at any given time. And it's different from your everyday computing in the sense that it's much faster. So perhaps 1,000 or 1,000,000 times faster than what you might have as a desktop or a laptop type computer. And they're also very large machines that are hosted in supercomputing centers or big data centers whose goal is to support these machines. And often they're supported by the government or sometimes private industry. Around the world, we typically think there's a few hundred of these machines. There's a list that kind of records the fastest, say, 500 machines on the planet at any given moment, and a large number of those supercomputers are in the US, and some of the fastest machines, in fact, right now, the two fastest machines, as you know, are a computer at Oak Ridge and a computer at Argonne. So that's how we think of supercomputing. And as you know, the DOE has been investing in supercomputing for a long time, and starting around 2014 or so, created a project called the Exascale Project to both create exascale computers and exascale applications. Maybe you can tell us about why DOE did that and what exascale means in the world of supercomputing, and maybe why it was so important that a project exists to connect that with cancer.
Sure. So exascale computing refers to computing systems that can perform 1 billion full precision calculations per second. And as you said, the Department of Energy set that goal a decade ago, not only to achieve exascale computing, but to achieve it with extreme energy efficiency. And both our laboratories are very proud to have delivered on that vision with these two systems that are dedicated to open science. We're already seeing how exascale computing is driving innovation and breakthroughs in many scientific domains, including medicine, from drug discovery all the way to clinical care. And this is a crucial milestone for science and technology, because now we can tackle challenges that were previously we could not. We can tackle them faster. We can analyze large scales of data with extreme efficiency. We can do simulations of very complex systems. And we're seeing that how much excitement right now exists in terms of creating the human digital twin. So these are some ways that the exascale computing has enabled. And this is just the beginning. Now, the project that you mentioned was extremely critical because it was not just about the deployment of the supercomputers, but also the deployment of the software, the co-design of the software that makes these advances possible. And the partnership with the National Cancer Institute was very critical in terms of developing the software stack, the software tools that are necessary for cancer research. And maybe you can speak, you can provide more meat, because that's how the conversation started with the National Cancer Institute at the time. We sat down with them to discuss the specific challenges that led to that partnership.
Yeah, well, some of those challenges that we worked on together at the beginning to get organized was that National Cancer Institute, of course, is the largest government-funded effort for cancer research. It powers much of cancer research around the planet. And while it's traditionally focused on experiment and clinical work, it realized that they needed a partnership around advanced computing to bring the power of supercomputers to the many challenges. And some of the challenges that were outlined when this collaboration between Department of Energy and NCI started included the following. So one was this idea of deeply understanding the molecular interactions that power cancer cell or cancer mutations and the resulting changes in cancer in physiology and cancer cells. So really kind of drilling down into the biophysics and the molecular details of tumors. The second challenge was, most cancer drugs are developed at a great cost, and still only some patients respond to them. And so the idea was, could we use artificial intelligence and large-scale computing provided by the DOE with the large-scale data sets that NCI had collected over the years on drug response and the underlying mechanisms for drugs. So this idea of, can we combine those things to improve our ability to predict which patients might respond to which drug? And then, of course, the third target was your project, which was facing this idea of, can we use AI to ingest all of the health records or the pathology reports and related clinical information to learn patterns and to learn how to better identify trends across the patient population. And those three challenges were chosen because NCI was ready from a data standpoint and from a problem standpoint, and the DOE community, including ourselves, right, thought that they were ripe for progress in a partnership mode. So maybe you can explain a little bit about how you think that partnership fit into the broader Moonshot initiative and why it was important that there be something like this partnership in the context of the Moonshot.
Sure. When we came together as teams back then, I still remember the days of, these are the challenges, how we can address them with supercomputing. And if you recall a meeting at Argonne where we put on the board that deep learning, this is the way forward. And I do remember that for the clinical community, deep learning was non-existent at the time. And we thought that, yes, there is a lot of promise. So that exemplifies the power of interdisciplinary research. We brought different expertise, complementary expertise. From the Department of Energy, we brought the computer scientists, the physicists, the engineers to work alongside with the oncologists, the biologists, the clinical researchers, to dream different ways of tackling well-known challenges that were part of the Cancer Moonshot initiative. So that cross-pollination of ideas is what has led to innovative approaches in cancer research that we're seeing now making into practice. Certainly because of this breadth of activity from basic research, as you said, all the way to clinical translation, we had that path mapped, or at least a vision of that path mapped of how we can take scientific discoveries to translate it into tools in the hands of the clinicians and the patients.
So, at the beginning, we also realized that we needed to create a project that was funded on the DOE side to move the software stacks forward around deep learning on the exascale platforms. And we called that project Candle, and it was really a joint venture between you and I and our friends out at Livermore. Maybe you can talk a little bit about why we had to do that, or what was the purpose of that project as a key element of the collaboration.
The main driver for that particular project is that we saw a good synergy in the challenges that we were facing as respective agencies. We knew that we needed to create a specific software stack to address the needs of the cancer community, the cancer research community, and to drive also the innovations that were taking place at the time while we were trying to build our systems, the exascale computing systems. You remember how many conversations we had at the time that we're trying to build the airplane and fly it at the same time. So that's where Candle was a fantastic collaboration between the two agencies, because we envisioned that project as a way to drive the respective missions while respecting at the same time the respective missions. And I believe that we have a lot of great successes to show.
Yeah, okay. So maybe you can talk about some of those successes and what you think the impact of the collaboration has been already, but also maybe where you think the impact will be in the future as the R&D plays out and gets deployed, and just where you see it, the impact kind of going.
Yeah, I can certainly use as an example the project that I started leading. Now, of course, it is in the hands, in very competent hands with new leaders. That project is known as Mosaic, which is the modeling outcomes using surveillance data and scalable AI for cancer. And what we tried to do with that project was to completely modernize the National Cancer Surveillance Program. We knew that they had a very important mandate to continuously collect data from cancer patients, because cancer is a reportable disease. And that process is a very time-consuming process that involves a lot of highly trained individuals. And being able to collect that information in a timely manner is extremely important for the epidemiologists who use that information. At the time from collecting the information to making it available to the epidemiologists for epidemiological research was approximately 28 months, and we wanted to shorten that window. So that's how we envision artificial intelligence, in particular deep learning, in the sense of let's train computers to read these clinical records and extract information in an efficient way, in a reliable way, across all these data elements that were important and continue to be important for the National Cancer Institute's SEER program, the surveillance program. That was the beginning. By developing these tools, which are now deployed in the hands of multiple cancer registries across the US, accelerating the time from several months to a few days in terms of making that information available, we went to the next level. So now that you can access the information and you can structure the information faster, what can you do about it? And that's how we started building on this particular project in terms of now we can collect more information, synthesize information in terms of what are these trajectories, the cancer patient trajectories, in terms of informing the effectiveness of treatments, helping match patients to clinical trials faster. So these are some of the tools that are developed and shared with the broader community, not only with the cancer surveillance community. We're seeing now new collaborations building with other federal agencies that have similar challenges, such as the Veterans Administration or other registries across the world, because all cancer registries in the modern world face similar challenges. So we're very excited in terms of how we tackled that initial challenge, just collecting the information, to all the additional benefits that we are seeing developing throughout this collaboration.
That's
and
great.
I'm sure you can share a lot of other challenges from the basic science side.
Yeah, well, I can talk a little
Successes.
bit about what we were doing. So our focus was on this idea of the core models behind the idea of predictive oncology. So if you have a tumor, can you characterize that tumor at a molecular level by sequencing its DNA or sequencing its RNA, or other measurements, of course, including imaging and so on, and try to build models that can predict whether that tumor is going to respond to a given treatment regimen. So it might be a single drug or a combination of drugs. And at the time when we were first starting on this, there were a handful of groups around the world that were exploring this with traditional machine learning methods, the kind of methods you might hear of, like a random forest or something that was relatively small data, a small number of parameters. And our idea was essentially, could we aggregate data from many studies across many types of cancer and many drugs into a single kind of model, almost like a one model to rule them all kind of concept that would be pan tumor and pan drug. And the reason for trying that was that, as you mentioned, deep learning, and how when we started this, deep learning was just not really well internalized by the clinical community or even the cancer research community as a resource. We realized early on, through a lot of experiments, that you couldn't build accurate models using deep neural networks on a small amount of data. That's still true, largely. And so the idea was, how could we aggregate enough data that the power of neural networks might actually come out into this? So we had to aggregate data across multiple historical drug response studies, and produce models both for single drugs and for drug combinations. And some of that was some of the first papers that we put out on that were like the first large scale attempt at doing that. What's been interesting over the last 5 or 6 years is how many additional groups around the world have started doing that. So when we first started, there were a handful of models out there, and now there's over 100 models that have been published by many different groups, more or less trying to do the same thing, that is trying to build a core that can predict which tumor is going to respond to which drug. And that made us realize that the challenge going forward right now isn't so much about building a single model to do that. It's about trying to understand all the different ideas the community has tried to improve those models. And so we have a project called Improve. And the whole idea there is to systematically assess the models that have been built by the community, including ours and our collaborators and competitors and so on, and to put them all on the same kind of footing and compare them, and to try to learn which techniques matter, which types of data, which types of transformations, which ways of encoding patient outcome or outcome of experiments actually matters. And so that's been a shift. It's also resulted in a large number of collaborations from other institutions as part of that, because it's a whole community effort to try to come up with standardized testing and comparison methods. And all of this is open. It's open to the whole community. So it's been a lot of fun. We've also used it as a rationale for aggregating even more data into a giant kind of data cube that's available to the community for training and evaluating such models.
Yeah, you reminded me of all the benefits were beyond the specific problems and how we tackle the specific problems, but the collaboration with the broader community is extremely important. And we have seen the growth even in our 2 user facilities. I'm sure you can say the same with all of these software being available to everyone, the models being available to everyone. We have seen a huge influx from the biomedical community in our user allocation programs. They are bringing more bigger, more exciting problems. So the demand has grown. And this is extremely exciting in interdisciplinary research when we build these communities that they learn then how to self-organize and make the most of the capabilities and resources that are available.
Absolutely. And, early on in the collaboration, we conducted these big seminar, in person before pandemic, person training sessions, jam sessions, I don't know, teach-ins or whatever, held at Bethesda campus. Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting, I had a visitor this morning who's from NCI. There's a new division branch there that's building out AI, and of course, over the last couple of years, the number of AI projects inside the National Cancer Institute has expanded, and across NIH has expanded. And I'd like to think that we had some small part to play in making it possible for the leadership to realize there's advances and breakthroughs that could happen by really embracing more adventurous and aggressive computing techniques, not just all AI, but some simulation and other things,
of course,
to make it part of the permanent way we do cancer research and development in this country. And with the goal, of course, of improving, patient care. Have you thought about, just put your crystal ball on for a few minutes, and you think forward maybe 5 years from now, how patient care might be influenced by what we did in this collaboration?
So certainly the development and the deployment of the different tools in the hands of the users, that whole end-to-end pipeline, we have certainly accelerated this by building the community and the trust between the two communities. Personalized medicine, precision medicine is something that we have been all discussing and pursuing for many, many years. But I do believe the advances that have happened over the past few years, enabled by high-performance computing, that level of computing that we have achieved has accelerated that. The human digital twin, I do believe that's the next frontier for us to come as a community. It brings all the big challenges, multi-scale, multi-model, the interleaving of modeling and simulation with AI. This is the convergence of all of these problems that we have been tackling in a siloed way, coming together under the same umbrella. I always envisioned as an AI scientist when I was developing my small machine learning techniques in the hands of the radiologists back in the 90s, that the physician of the future will be sitting in front of their desktop, having truly the digital twin of the patient to be able to guide the decisions, the hard decisions the cancer patient needs to make. Decisions that go beyond the effectiveness of the treatment, decisions that involve how a treatment impacts me, the cancer patient. And these are deeply personal decisions. So to be able, me, the cancer patient, to make a decision that shows me my personalized path over time, based on critical decision time points, and not like the average patient.
Right.
I believe that's what empowers.
So what do you think is the like key, I don't know, breakthrough that's needed to make something like digital twins for patient care, whether it's in cancer or other diseases, feasible in our lifetime? Like what's the, if you had 2 or 3 magic bullets that would somehow accelerate that whole idea, what do you think we need to do?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not sure I have a clear answer. Still, the bridging the biology and the biomedical side, that becomes a huge, it is a huge lift for all of us. So to be able to bridge those two at some critical point, we cannot create the longitudinal trajectory in one shoot. We cannot. But what are these critical time points in the trajectory that when we intervene, it will make a difference in terms of flipping to a different point, different curve? Because up to this point, we seem to be making decisions based on the next time point. And the next time point may not be the optimal way of making decisions. So it is a constraint optimization problem. That's how I see it. And be focusing on a particular part of the trajectory, that would be the first
Do you think
where I
AI
would
is,
like to tackle.
do you
And
think
AI,
AI is going to help with this?
absolutely. I've always been a believer of AI, even before generative AI. The fact that we finally have access to very rich data sets, as I said, multi-scale, multi-modal data sets, and we have the ability to integrate the data sets in ways that were not possible before. That's extremely important. You and I, we have talked a lot about the foundational models for science and for specific scientific domains. I would love to see the two communities continue to work systematically, but aggressively towards a foundation model for cancer care.
I totally agree with you. I don't know what we're doing on time. I don't know, Allison, are we, do you want to come back on and help us moderate any questions coming in?
So we don't have any questions. I did have a question. Could you define what a digital twin is for our audience who have maybe not heard that term before?
I can do it. So a digital twin is a computer model. It could be based on simulation or AI or combination of those two things that can predict the behavior of a real world object in a specific way, not in a general way. So for example, each patient, right, each person is slightly different. Our genetics are different, our life history is different, our lifestyles are different. So a digital twin of a cancer patient or just of a human in general has to take into account the specifics of that human. So their genome, their maybe medical imaging, maybe their previous history in injuries or disease or lifestyle, so that it's a model of you, not a model of a generic person, but a model of you. And the idea comes originally from people in the aerospace industry and in the applied math community in particular, but where they were trying to build something like a digital twin of like an aircraft engine. And the idea was to distinguish a model for every specific aircraft engine, even if it was the same type of engine, but on different planes and so on, would have a different history. And so the idea was a model that is parameterized by the detailed history and specific condition of that object, so that you could use it to predict when that particular instance of something might need, say, maintenance or care, or whether it was maybe been in an environment that required you to treat it differently than before. So the idea of taking that of taking the concept of digital twin and translate it into medicine is what Gina was talking about, and it's very powerful. It's very hard though, because it's computationally very challenging. Humans are very complex. And in order to capture the history that would make that a model of you, will require a lot of data, not just things like your genome, but also maybe imaging and other information about you that will have to be protected and associated with that model. But it could open up a lot of opportunities for improving care, because not only could it be used to explain what might happen of a given treatment, but it could be used to test alternative treatments computationally before a decision is made.
Yeah, what Rick said is extremely powerful. By creating this virtual human, we will be able to do all of these what-if scenarios completely computationally. What if I introduce this treatment at this time point? What if the environmental exposure of the individual, because of the geographical location or the specific profession they have, interferes with, their biology? How would that alter the trajectory of the individual? When we do clinical trials, we are already seeing tremendous advances in virtual clinical trials, because that accelerates the deployment, the critical decisions about the deployment of medications. So it's absolutely the next frontier. And as Rick said, these are computational models. There is a lot we do not understand in human biology, and we are trying to fill these gaps with data we collect. And that's why artificial intelligence plays an important role in building these digital twins.
I was just looking here at the questions. So there was a question about collaborations and resources. So I should say that the DOE computers that Gina and I are talking about are open for open science type of work. They're you gain access via proposals. You can, of course, ask for initial time on the machines to get yourself ready. That's discretionary allocations by talking to the directors of the facilities. But but most of the time is allocated via competitive awards, like other kinds of user facilities in DOE. So that's a key point. There's another question here. I don't know, Allison, if you look through these, whether there's some that are...
Got a couple of questions. So one of them are, well, we've got a couple of questions specifically about the virtual twin. Do you have any idea of the timeline for when we might be able to implement this or roll this out to, as an actual thing people can use?
Well, it's already used a little bit for not entire human systems, but for example, for planning surgeries around, say, heart surgery or interventions, that where there's a need to build a model and either do surgical planning or, say, treatment planning. So, but it's not, I would say those are like pre-digital twins in some sense. I don't know, Gina, what do you think?
Well, it's hard to put a timeline, but certainly this is an international effort. This is not limited to DOE NCI. There is a whole community that's coming together around this topic and project, because it will take all of us.
Yeah, it's a grand challenge. It's like going
to a grand challenge
in the same category.
And one of the questions is where does the data exist for creating digital twins, and how much data is required?
The data. I can think.
Go ahead.
So certainly when it comes to biomedical challenges, clinical data is very difficult to share. And we had that challenge even within the DOE NCI partnership. It takes a lot of data use agreements and deciding the proper pathways to share the data. For the specific partnership, the Department of Energy does not own the data. Therefore, this is a decision that lies with the National Cancer Institute. But because we do believe in open science, we did everything possible from our part to ensure that we can share the trained models in the most secure way. And we are actually right now, as part of a DOE investment with another project known as BRAVE, we are working on developing mechanisms to generate synthetic data using cancer surveillance data that we can share with a broader community. And that is a very important effort for all of us to come together. I've been doing biomedical research for all my life, and I know the technical solutions are always easier than policy and administrative solutions. So as engineers and computer scientists, we try to find those solutions to enable science to move forward. Another area that probably Rick can speak more about this, we know that none of us has all of the resources to do it alone. So when it comes to training large-scale artificial intelligence models with privacy preservation that is necessary, federated learning is extremely important, and privacy preserving computing is extremely important. And the Department of Energy, the Advanced Scientific Computing and Research community, we are working very deeply in that area that will enable multiple scientific missions, and absolutely the biomedical space.
No, I agree. I mean, combining the insights that we get from cybersecurity and privacy and machine learning, and how to make it possible to actually share models and to share the knowledge content extracted from data without actually sharing the data is one of the key kind of challenges at doing this, to allow there to be a thriving kind of exchange while preserving privacy. But that's not unique to cancer or not unique to digital twins, but it's a general need, and it spans not just even healthcare. I mean, all kinds of areas of business and science.
Right. There's a couple of questions that came in about incorporating environmental or climate factors into the data sets and making that part of diagnostics or treatment, and kind of then maybe broadening that to predicting where cancers are coming from. Is that something that is applicable to these projects?
It's very applicable, and it's already happening under the
About the
Mosaic
exposome?
project.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, this is exactly what we call the exposome. We are integrating the phenome, the genome. The next thing is to integrate the exposome, and environmental factors and socioeconomic factors. All of these things are extremely important. We have access to different data sets. Actually, the Department of Energy also has a very rich history and research in environmental biology, environmental science. So we're bringing these resources to create more accurate longitudinal trajectories for the patients in terms of predicting the progression of the disease to metastasis, to recurrence. So yes, this is an ongoing target of the collaboration for its next phase.
There's a question here on assessing precision, and I think that's a really good question. So when we talk about building digital twins, we not only have to do them for humans, but we're going to have to do them for the model organisms that support biomedical research. So a digital twin of a mouse model and a rat model and other maybe zebrafish and other things. And the way that I think the community would have to make headway on assessing precision is by using the digital twins that can be maybe even more deeply calibrated for these model organisms to be able to assess, predict the effect of treatments or conditional, changes that you might make on the model organism, and reflect how well the digital twin predicts that outcome. And I think that's an empirical way that for assessing precision. Of course, we have the baseline data, which is, physicians make their best calls, the best decisions they can based on the data they have, and we have outcome data. And the issue for cancer in particular is that how well existing treatment strategies work is partially a function of the type of cancer and the type of treatments that are available and how aggressive and how specific that cancer is in terms of its behavior. And so, some treatment strategies can be quite easily assessed right now in terms of their likelihood of success, and others are much more difficult. And so it's not like it's a single number that could characterize this. It's going to be very highly dimensional. But I think validating digital twins on simpler models, on model organisms, are going to be absolutely essential. And it's why this has to be done, I think, as a community effort and with many groups challenging the assumptions and challenging the approaches so that you get the best of all the ideas the community has.
And there is a question about, is there going to be a call from DOE on this specific topic? I can't say that, but there is a request for information that is out right now around digital twin research. I'm going to drop that in the chat for you. It's actually through NSF, but DOE is part of that group making that call, that request for information. So go there, you can, share your thoughts on this research, on the direction, and the future of it. We always look to the community to hear what you want to know or what you're thinking, and requests for information are one of the ways we do that. Let's see. Going back to the questions, let's see. Do you see opportunities for breakthroughs made in these cancer-focused projects to translate to other human health challenges? So is there a broader impact?
We can both speak to
Go
that
ahead, Gina.
because
Yeah,
we
go
had
ahead.
the experience just a few years ago with the pandemic. We were in the midst of the project, right? Halfway through with the project, then the pandemic happened. And there were a lot of challenges that could leverage the computational products that we were developing for all the sub-projects happening under Candle, from discovering new targets, therapeutic targets, all the way to using clinical records to understand how the phenotype of the patients changes as an early indicator of what we need to do. So at the time, the same team shifted gears in terms of taking the same approaches and to pivoting them towards understanding what's happening with the pandemic. Some of this has already been shared with the broader community. I know that the National Cancer Institute and the Cancer Surveillance Program already has highlighted how they took the tools that we were developing to try to understand the impact of COVID on cancer patients and and how the surveillance data changed during that time. I know Rick led a fantastic effort when it came to, discovering therapeutic targets, and he can speak to that. Already we have tremendous examples of how these tools have helped and how it is important to be proactive in terms of working on these partnerships, because you never know the additional value of what we build together as a community.
Yeah, just a short follow-up on that. Because we had already been working on building out the Candle environment, the distributed learning environment that we built for cancer, but we didn't make it so specific to cancer that we couldn't use it for other things. And so that same environment was used to screen billions of drugs on COVID targets, for example, on SARS-CoV-2 targets. And we were able to mine the literature for support for drug targets and so on. So I think the opportunities for the technology to apply to many human diseases is very open. Not every disease has an agency like NCI behind it, right? So, I mean, we're very lucky that the US is lucky that we have agencies like the National Cancer Institute that operates at scale and with enormous breadth across the country on one of the major, risks for health. But similar things could be done in heart disease or in neurological diseases or other, diseases. And of course, we would hope that the technology would become, in some sense, available as an underlying capability. I think one of the questions in here was about, private industry. There's a lot of the kinds of things that we're talking about are also translatable into private industry, and private industry is doing them. And so if you think about how the advances from a project like this would ultimately roll out across the whole country or the whole world, it would be largely done by private sector, creating, scalable resources to deploy and support. And I think the role of DOE and the role of NCI is really about pushing on the envelope, pushing on that frontier. And as things start to work, to help ensure that, industry picks up what works and takes it further.
I would say two guiding principles we had when we started the partnership and we were thinking about solutions to the problems is that we were looking for solutions that are scalable and solutions that are extensible. And we can certainly say that we have demonstrated that our solutions satisfy both principles.
Great, thank you. Here's a question that's maybe a little more in the weeds. Have you ever used historical data to test the precision by using patient history and treatment results? So using the virtual twin and seeing if the treatment results predicted from the twin are similar to actual patient responses.
So yes, I mean, that's one way that you can do retrospective testing of these forward models. It requires a lot of care to make sure that the data that you're going to test the models on are isolated from any data that you're using to build the models, of course. But that is a very common way to test any kind of forward model in biology or in healthcare. It's being used, in terms of predicting treatment outcomes, survival, all kinds of, factors that you might want to make a predictive model for. But yes, that's exactly what is done. Of course, you also test it against laboratory experiments. The work that was supported in the effort I was talking about was aimed at preclinical results. So it wasn't aimed so much at predicting patient response as it was trying to allow us to have a model that would help us much earlier in the pipeline to decide the efficacy of potential future compounds or treatment regimens.
Right. So going back more towards the computing side of it, could you comment about the recent development of GPU-based accelerated computing on healthcare AI, the healthcare AI field?
Gina, do you want to talk about that?
We've been doing GPU accelerated computing for a very long time. This is not something new. So I'm not sure I understand exactly.
Well, I think what they were meaning is that, if you're going to have widespread use of AI in medicine, it's particularly advanced AI, it's going to be very computationally intensive and you're going to need acceleration, right? And so GPUs and customized accelerators are clearly necessary, except for the smallest things that you might do. And DOE, of course, has a huge amount of experience with this, particularly at Oak Ridge, as they pioneered the use of GPUs in simulation. But lots and lots of GPUs are now available, and the private sector is awash with them. So I think it's becoming just a common part of the infrastructure, but absolutely necessary for advanced AI. I mean, there might be some edge things you can do without GPUs, but for the kind of core heavy lifting, you're going to need GPUs or some other kind of accelerator system to do it.
And this is part of our thinking every time we embark on designing the next system, right? And this is part of the conversation right now. What happens after Frontier, after Aurora? What is the architecture of those systems that will keep enabling the scientific community and a community that we know will have increasing demands in AI? That is part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
Is it important for DOE and NCI to continue to collaborate? What are the next steps, or what should we be focusing on in the future?
Well, I
Well,
think it's important. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
I mean, yes. I mean, the agencies, of course, always talk to each other, and um, the many initiatives in the government are all of government initiatives. Whether it's curing Cancer Moonshot is an all of government effort with many agencies participating. So there's that piece. The DOE AI initiative that recently is launched with the bill being introduced by Senator Manchin and Murkowski, authorizes on the DOE side. That's envisioned as a major push that has built into it interagency partnerships. And so I think alignment between DOE and NCI, we've already established that we can work together well. And I think we have to continue to identify areas that are on the frontier. So I mean, the AI trajectory we've been on is a good one, but I think that digital twins could be a really solid collaboration target for the future. I think super advanced diagnostics and maybe novel treatment strategies. There have been a set of visioneering workshops that were held jointly between NCI and DOE a few years ago, where the community, not just the labs that were already collaborating, but the broader cancer research community was challenged to think about really novel approaches to cancer diagnosis, treatment, and patient care that would require breakthroughs, science and technology breakthroughs. And I think that's where DOE and NCI need to, work together, is where there's, DOE is the largest supporter of physical sciences research in the country. And of course, NCI is the largest supporter of cancer research. And we need to bring those things together. So I think there's many possible areas. And as the agency leadership imagines like what the next 5-10 year roadmap looks like, there should be new ideas, new things that we could work on together.
I also agree that the partnership between the two agencies is even more important than ever before. In the next 5-10 years, the convergence of post-exascale computing, generative AI, and even the emerging quantum computing, that convergence is poised to completely revolutionize cancer research. Now, what are the target problems? We can come together as a community. All of us have our own priorities, but there is absolutely tremendous potential and a very large number of problems. I would like to see more precise modeling of the cellular systems. We're coming so close to being able to model the single cell and with the drug interactions. These are very important discoveries that right now we can actually say, yeah, they are possible in the next 5-10 years. So this is not the time to slow down the partnership. It's actually the time to amplify the partnership.
Yeah, and it's a challenge, of course, given the way budgets are constructed, because these are siloed with respect to Congress. But I totally agree with Gina. The future is bright and moving faster, and we're going to need to leverage all the resources that we have. So it's we really need to challenge ourselves to imagine what the hardest, most impactful problems we could choose to make headway on together. And also, there's no reason that, NCI, we're hoping, one of the things that we hope would come out of this collaboration is that computing more generally in NIH and NCI in particular would gain a bigger foothold. And there's some, evidence that that's happening. And that on the DOE side, that it's really interesting, right? That the first large-scale AI effort that we put into exascale was a collaboration on cancer, right? That hasn't been lost on us. And that means that there may be other problem areas out there where there's some new approach that, the mathematicians and computer scientists and data scientists in the DOE could help accelerate in partnership with other agencies, whether it's NCI or other agencies, where there's data or other unique resource that we can bring together. And that's the kind of synergy that we need to keep looking for.
Great. We have 5 minutes left. There were a couple questions in the chat about industry and how do you see the private industry kind of fitting in here, or is there a chance for collaboration? And I will give you 2 minutes to answer that.
Partnership with industry is extremely important. It has been part of the collaboration in different forms throughout the previous years, starting from the hardware itself, because we were both building big supercomputers, and that was one of the driver applications. We wanted to make sure that these computers are ready for the cancer research community. Specific to the sub-project, certainly the project that I started leading had a lot of interactions with smaller, different kind of private industry, so that we make sure that we do not duplicate efforts. Rick, maybe from your experience?
Well, industry, look, the system we have in this country, the government does certain things. In R&D, the key role here is bringing problems to industry that industry otherwise might not work on. And what I found really interesting in this project was when we started talking to computer companies about the cancer problem, they were super interested, right? I mean, for a long time, computer companies, they know about fluid dynamics and they know about classical supercomputing simulations, but we were willing to say, look, we think cancer is going to be a large-scale computing application in the future. And it's different than what we do in fluid dynamics or climate or nuclear particle physics or something like that. And so it was very exciting for companies to collaborate, because it's a story that they can tell that immediately resonates with the public. And a lot, we would get these people calling us up and saying, look, we really like working with you on this because it's different from what we've been working on before, and we can see how it might open up new, in a very local sense, new markets for them. But it gave their staff another reason to come to work, right? To help advance healthcare and patient outcomes. And not everybody in tech has that opportunity to contribute in that way. And so that was pretty exciting. And we also, early on in the program, there were these annual meetings that we had, and I remember one being sponsored and held at Intel, and we heard a lot about the cancer survivor stories of people who work in tech, in the tech world, and they very much want to have a way to contribute. So I think it's very important that we continue doing that in the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much for spending an hour with us talking about this very important topic. We really appreciate the chance to be able to highlight the Department of Energy's contribution to the Cancer Moonshot. It's been very enlightening, and we had some questions that we couldn't get to. So, maybe we'll have another session in the future at some point. We can talk more about this. But really appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you all to the audience for your very thoughtful questions. And yeah, we'll be posting this recording on the Office of Science YouTube in a week or two, probably. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Allison.
Bye.